Yo, what's up? Welcome back to another episode of the SWUS College Football Friday night. We got two bowl games and then the playoff game between Indiana and Notre Dame. I'm going to do the playoff game last. I know most of you are probably here to hear that one. So if you only want to hear the playoff game, just fast forward to the third one. But I am going to go through the two bowl games first. So Friday night, let's do it. Welcome to the SWUS. Hey, get the sauce. First up, Ohio, Jacksonville State in what is the Staff DNA Cure Bowl. This one's being played at Camping World Stadium in Florida. All right, so that's up first. It's at 12 noon. We got Ohio against Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State catching 4.5 points in this one. Total sitting at 56.5. Let's take a look at the pie charts. According to the data, action seems to be coming in on the Ohio side. 65% of the tickets, over 70% of the money. As I always say, take that data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this matchup, and we'll start with the Ohio Bobcats. You'll love to see it. The only team with 0 players in the transfer portal. Ohio Bobcats, 0 players in the transfer portal, so we should see the full strength Ohio Bobcats in this one. On the Jacksonville State side, it's not that they have a ton of players in the portal. They have a good amount. It's just that they all come from one position group. The secondary's completely gone. 3 of the top 4 corners, 2 of the top 3 safeties in the transfer portal. Now, from what I'm reading, there's a chance some of these guys may play in the game. I couldn't find definite answers on that. If you know anything, share it in the comments. But I do know, as far as who has entered the transfer portal, secondary cooked for Jacksonville State. Now, you might look at the season-long numbers and say, Kyle, that doesn't matter. Ohio's a run-first offense all the way. Who cares about Jacksonville State secondary? And if you go by the season-long numbers, that would be true. The Ohio Bobcats are 10th in the country in rushing frequency. This has been a run-first offense all the way this season. That being said, in their last 2 games, out of nowhere, Parker Navarro is looking like Aaron Rodgers, completing over 71% of his passes, over 218 yards per game, 5 touchdowns, 1 pick, passer rating over 218. One of those in the MAC championship game. And yes, I faded him in that game. He absolutely cooked. This is a guy that got benched earlier in the year. If you look at his season-long numbers, they're not even good. 10 touchdowns, 10 picks, C+ big-time throw rate, C- QB rating. He hasn't even been good for most of the season, but out of nowhere, these last 2 games, he's looking excellent. So does Ohio have a passing attack we have to respect now? I mean, it's only 2 games. That's kind of a small sample size, but he looks excellent. We can't just disregard it. Jacksonville State missing the secondary, Parker Navarro on a heater. You definitely don't like that if you're betting Jacksonville State in this game. And if you think that's true, if you think Parker Navarro can throw the ball on Jacksonville State's defense, you pull up the season-long numbers, and it might start to look like Ohio can do whatever they want on Jacksonville State's defense. Look at the rushing numbers. They're 12th in the country in yards per carry, 27th in success rate per rush, 27th in effective rush. Jacksonville State, not the best run defense, not the best pass defense, maybe missing a big chunk of their secondary. Looking like a pretty favorable matchup for Ohio offensively in this one. Now, here's where it gets a bit confusing, because at this point, I'm thinking Ohio is going to move the chains pretty easily in this game. Jacksonville State, on the defensive side of the ball, playing their best football of the season right now, and it's not even close. In their last 3 games, they're allowing just 14 points per game, 4.4 yards per play, 37.2% success rate. They've been playing excellent defense these last few games. Now, does that matter? They may be missing their entire secondary. I don't know. That's a question I don't have the answer to. But the fact is, this defense is coming into this game red hot. Not sure what to really do with that information, if I'm being honest. I mean, I don't think I trust Jacksonville State. If you take away their secondary, that's kind of an important part of a football defense, is the secondary. And I'm not even sure if the secondary is going to be gone in this game. I know they're in the portal. Not sure if they're playing in this game. So really tough in terms of making a prediction. Personally, I think Ohio is going to be able to move the ball. If you're asking my personal opinion, you also have to keep in mind that Rich Rodriguez is gone, took the West Virginia job. And I also don't think it's confirmed yet that Luke Olson is coaching in this game, the defensive coordinator. He's actually a candidate to take the West Virginia DC job under Rich Rod. So I don't even know if the DC is going to be coaching in this game. Rod Smith is coaching. He's the interim head coach, the OC. But as far as the defensive coordinator goes, I don't know the status with Luke Olson. Now, what about the matchup on the other side of the ball? We got the Jacksonville State offense against the Ohio defense, and this is an interesting matchup. Look at the Jacksonville State run game against the Ohio run defense. A lot of green. Jacksonville State, 4th in the country in yards per carry, 21st in success rate per rush, 6th in effective rush. Against Ohio, 9th in the country in yards per carry, 7th in success rate per rush, 34th in effective rush. We got ourselves a battle here. Jacksonville State's run game against the Ohio defensive front. Now, this Ohio run defense coming into this game on one. 2.19 yards per carry allowed in their last 5 games, 30% success rate per rush, under 62 rushing yards allowed per game in their last 5 games. Now, to be fair, look at the opponents. Kent State, absolute trash and a pass-first offense anyway. Eastern Michigan, pass-first offense with Cole Snyder. Toledo, pass-first offense with Tucker Gleason. Ball State, pass-first offense with Samanza. Miami of Ohio, pass-first offense with Gabbard. So, yeah, they have elite numbers against the run in their last 5 games. All 5 are pass-first offenses. None of those 5 offenses can really run the ball. In fact, this entire season, there's really only 3 games where Ohio saw an offense that I would consider a rushing offense. South Alabama, Central Michigan, and Buffalo. In those games, the run defense numbers don't look nearly as good. They're not bad. They allowed 4 yards per carry, 42% success rate per rush, 132 rushing yards allowed per game. So maybe this Ohio run defense not quite as good as the full season numbers indicate. On paper, they look like the best run defense ever. They've played a lot of pass-first offenses this year. That being said, you can say the same exact thing about the Jacksonville State rushing attack. You look at their full season numbers, they look like one of the best rushing attacks in the country. If you look at the defenses they've seen this season, I mean, you don't see many top 100 defenses on this list. I mean, you got Coastal Carolina at 86th. Louisville's on there, 37th. Louisiana Tech at 81st. Sam Houston State, 59th. So not a ton of great defenses on this schedule. In fact, if you just isolate it to their 4 games, I cut it off at 86 against top 86 defenses. So the Coastal Carolina game's in. 4 games against top 86 defenses. They actually only averaged just over 4 yards per carry. Success rate per rush under 40%. So these elite Jacksonville State rushing numbers on the year kind of been racking them up against some bad defenses, to be fair. So the criticism I just gave to Ohio's run defense, you can slap Jacksonville State's run game with the same exact criticism. So is Jacksonville State going to be able to run the ball on Ohio in this game? It's a tough question to answer. You look on paper, this is a top 25 run defense against a top 25 rushing attack. You take a closer look at the schedule, both of these units are overvalued. So probably about 4.2 yards per carry, maybe not as explosive as we're used to seeing for Jacksonville State, but I'm sure they will be able to move the chains on the ground a bit. We know they're not going to be able to throw the ball because this Ohio pass defense looks great. In their last 5 games, they're allowing 5.5 yards per pass attempt, 31.1% success rate per dropback. And you look at the 5 teams, we already went through them. Other than Kent State, these teams can throw the ball. So they've been seeing offenses that can throw the ball and shutting it down. Jacksonville State, not much of a passing attack. So the pass game definitely shouldn't be there for Jacksonville State, but I'm sure they will be able to run the ball a bit. So where does that leave me in terms of placing a bet? Well, I'm leaning towards the Ohio side because I do think they're going to be able to move the ball. Not thrilled with the idea of laying 4.5 points. The total's a little weird. It's a super high total. In my opinion, it's super high for a reason. Both these teams should be able to move the ball. The problem is both these teams run the ball a lot, so the clock should never stop in this game, which makes betting an over tough. Kind of makes me lean towards the under. But as far as a side against the spread, Ohio minus 4.5, kind of like the Jacksonville State team total under, if I'm being honest. Just looked it up. It's sitting at 25.5, so I like that. Ohio minus 4.5 and Jacksonville State team total under 25.5. Next game, we got Tulane versus Florida in what is the Union Home Mortgage Gasparilla Bowl. This one's at Raymond James. So we're in Tampa here. Florida's now laying 10.5 pretty much across the board. Total sitting at 49.5 across the board. Let's take a look at the pie charts. And according to the data, action's coming in on the Florida side. Over 65% of the tickets, over 85% of the money. This number was at 14, though. Bought down to 10.5, indicative of some sharp action coming in on the Tulane side. Seems like the action's coming in on the Florida side, though. As I always say, take this data with a grain of salt. So let's get into this one, and we'll start with the lead story. Darian Mensah has entered the transfer portal. He's going to Duke. He will not be playing in this game. He's had a good season, too. Over 2,500 yards, 9.6 yards per attempt, 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. So who will be starting at quarterback for Tulane is Ty Thompson. You might remember him. 5-star recruit at Oregon, rode the bench behind Bo Nix for a couple years, transferred to Tulane, was supposed to be the starter this year, got beat out for the job by Mensah. So this is going to be his first career start. He supposedly has a ton of talent. I don't know much about him other than what's pictured on the screen here. He's a 5-star recruit, went to Oregon, sat the bench behind Bo Nix for 2 years, transferred to Tulane, sat the bench behind Mensa, first career start. Now, Tulane's been a run-first offense all the way this year. They're 8th in rushing frequency, so I don't know how much we're going to see Ty Thompson drop back to pass here. So why don't we start with, will Tulane be able to run the ball against Florida? And if you look at this graphic, it looks like they might be able to. They're 37th in yards per carry, 32nd in success rate per rush, 11th in effective rush. Florida 115th in success rate per rush. So maybe Tulane's able to run the ball in this game. I will say Florida's run defense has been pretty tough this year. There was just 2 games where they got run on, the Texas game and the Texas A&M game. You take out those 2, and in their other 10 football games, they allowed just 3.43 yards per carry. Success rate per rush is still up over 48%, so you can run the ball, you can move the chains on the ground against Florida, but as a whole, take out those 2 games, and this Florida run defense was pretty tough. And we should see pretty much the same Florida defense out there. 6 of the 7 starters on the defensive front are playing in this game. So pretty much the same Florida defense on the field. You take into consideration that this Tulane run game seems to have fallen off a cliff. I mean, in their last 2 games against Memphis and Army, 86 rushing yards per game, 3.66 yards per carry. This is a run-first offense. 86 rushing yards per game in those 2. Compare that to the previous 4 games, over 265 rushing yards per game. So this Tulane run game just disappeared. This team just seems to have quit the last 2 games of the year on the defensive side as well. We'll get to that in a second. So I don't know if they're going to be able to run the ball on this Florida defensive front. And you have to take into consideration the strength of schedule here. Florida's opponents' average OFEI ratings, 32.55. So the average offensive rating of Florida's opponents, 32.55 compared to 72 for Tulane. On the defensive side, 71 to 36. So obviously you didn't need me to tell you that. Florida plays a significantly stronger schedule than Tulane. So when you're looking at graphics like this, you might look at this graphic and say, hey, this Tulane offensive line can generate push against the Florida defensive front. I don't know about that. If you consider that this Florida defensive line is seeing LSU's offensive line, Georgia's offensive line, Texas offensive line, Texas A&M offensive line. Tulane's offensive line, although it's been good, it's definitely a step down in competition for this Florida defensive front. So based on what we've seen the last 2 weeks from this Tulane offense, I really don't have faith in them moving the ball. I mean, maybe Ty Thompson is the next Deshaun Watson. I mean, maybe he's going to be the man. Deshaun Watson, probably not the best example there, but maybe Ty Thompson is the man, and we're going to find out. But as it stands right now, I think Tulane's going to struggle to move the ball. But what about the matchup on the other side? We got the Florida offense against the Tulane defense. These 2 units actually dead even. Florida's offense is 46th in OFEI. Tulane's defense, 46th in DFEI. So dead even here, according to FEI ratings. Obviously, the story with Florida's offense this year has been the quarterback situation. There was Graham Mertz, and then there was DJ Lagway. Florida had a lot more success with DJ Lagway at quarterback. In fact, they were 5-1 in the games that DJ Lagway started. And check this out. The one loss was against Georgia, and they were actually winning 10-3 when Lagway got hurt. So if you take out that game, because he got hurt in the second quarter, they were up 10-3. They were actually undefeated in the games that DJ Lagway started. No question, this entire Florida team seemed to get, let's say, a confidence boost, an energy boost with DJ Lagway at quarterback. They definitely like this kid, and it saved Billy Napier's job, it looks like. And this team just looked different with him at quarterback. In the last 4 DJ Lagway games, I took out the Georgia game because he got hurt early on. 32.5 points per game, over 40% success rate, 6.85 yards per play. So this Florida offense was working, and look at the opponents. Kentucky, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State. I mean, all defenses, well, maybe not Florida State this year, but all defenses that are probably tougher and more talented than the Tulane defense. And the Tulane defense, just like the Tulane offense, kind of quit last couple games of the year. Through their first 11 games, they were allowing just 17 points per game, 4.8 yards per play, success rate under 34%. In their last 2 games against Memphis and Army, they allowed 34.5 points per game, over 6.1 yards per play. This Tulane defense just disappeared. So against Florida, DJ Lagway, that team really excited about the future. I don't think they'll take one off here. I think Florida's going to score a lot of points on Tulane. So when it comes to betting it, that's the angle I feel most comfortable with. Florida scoring points. Do I want to lay 10.5? Not really, because Ty Thompson is a bit of a question mark. I don't think it's crazy if he came out and his first career start showed us that talent that everyone saw. He's obviously very talented. He was very highly recruited. So maybe Ty Thompson comes out and is just the man in this game. So instead of laying the 10.5, give me the Florida team total over 30.5. I trust Florida to make some plays against this Tulane defense, a Tulane defense that hasn't looked good in a few since like week 13 now. So Florida team total over 30.5. Do I actually bet this? I'm not sure, but I don't hate it. Florida team total over 30.5 next game. Now for the game most of you probably clicked on this link to see. Indiana, Notre Dame. This one's in South Bend. Most sports books have dropped this down to 7. There are still a couple of 7.5s out there if you look, though. Total sitting at 52, a couple 51, and mostly 52. Let's get into the pie charts here. And according to the data, this one's pretty split, man. 53% of the tickets on Indiana, 51% of the money. So pretty much a 50-50 split here in terms of action. Now let's talk about this matchup. Both these teams finished the season 11-1. Indiana 9-3 against the spread. Notre Dame 9-2-1 against the spread. Strength of schedule goes to Notre Dame. Notre Dame 21st in strength of schedule. Indiana 42nd. So both these teams similar looking records on the year. They do have a common opponent, Purdue. And actually, they both beat the dog shit out of Purdue. Notre Dame 66-7 on the road at Purdue. Purdue got beat by Indiana 66-0. So both hung a 66 piece against Purdue, their only common opponent. But anyway, let's match these two teams up on the field. We'll start with the Indiana offense. They're 37th in rushing frequency on the season. Now, a lot of this year was spent with a huge lead. So we know this offense likes to throw the ball, even though they are 37th in rushing frequency. When you spend the first half of the season beating every team by 30 points, yeah, you're going to run the ball a lot. This is an offense that wants to throw the ball with Curtis Rourke, and their numbers on the year are excellent. 4th in the country in yards per pass attempt, 1st in success rate per dropback, 9th in effective pass. This offense is sitting at 3rd in OFEI. Bad news, look at the Notre Dame pass defense numbers here. 2nd in the country in yards per pass attempt, 1st in success rate per dropback, 2nd in effective pass. The defense is 2nd in DFEI. So quite the matchup here. Will Curtis Rourke be able to throw the ball on Notre Dame's defense? Well, if you pull up Curtis Rourke's full season numbers, I mean, they look elite. Over 2,800 yards, 9.8 yards per attempt, 27 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. The story with Curtis Rourke and the Indiana passing attack is pretty much the strength of schedule breakdown. Through 8 weeks, Indiana was blowing everybody out. They were 71st in the country in strength of schedule at the time. They finished the year 42nd. So their schedule got significantly stronger in those last 4 games, and we saw Curtis Rourke's passing production take a huge dip here through their first 7 games when their strength of schedule was 71st. I mean, these are video game numbers. Over 310 passing yards per game, almost 11 yards per attempt, success rate per dropback over 63%. In those last 4 games, they saw Michigan State, Michigan, Ohio State, and then Purdue. Purdue probably doesn't belong on that list, but Michigan and Ohio State, just 221.5 passing yards per game, success rate per dropback over 48%. Yards per attempt drops from 11 to 7.9. So we saw Indiana's passing attack, I don't want to say fall off a cliff because it was still all right looking. It was really just the Ohio State game where it looked really bad, but we definitely saw a huge dip in production when we got into some of those tougher games like Michigan and Ohio State. So when we pull up Notre Dame's defensive numbers on the year, 13.6 points per game. I mean, look at their numbers against the pass. 5.39 yards per attempt, 157.9 passing yards allowed per game, 27.1% success rate per dropback. So we pull up these numbers and we might think, oh, Curtis Rourke couldn't do shit against Ohio State. No way he's going to do shit against Notre Dame's defense in South Bend. And I completely understand how you may think that. But here's the thing with Notre Dame's defense. Let's pull up their schedule. I have to ask, what quarterbacks have Notre Dame seen? You got Texas A&M, Connor Wegman lost his starting job. Northern Illinois, I mean, Ethan Hampton couldn't even throw the ball in MAC defenses. Purdue, Miami of Ohio. Okay, Gabbert's pretty good, but that's a MAC program. Louisville, there's one. Tyler Shuck, there's one. Stanford, remember, Ashton Daniels was banged up. He didn't play the week before that. We didn't even know if Ashton Daniels was going to be playing in that game. He ended up playing. He looked bad. He wasn't 100%. And by the way, Ashton Daniels really isn't even that good as a thrower. So far we have Louisville. After that, you have Georgia Tech. Haynes King did not play in that game. They played the backup quarterback. Navy doesn't throw the ball. Florida State, that's funny. Virginia, Calandry was terrible in the second half of the season. He was one of the worst quarterbacks in the ACC. After that, Army doesn't throw the ball. Then you have USC with Maava. I'll give you that one. So Louisville and USC. I don't know how good Maava is. We're kind of just figuring that out, but I'll give you that one. Louisville with Tyler Shuck, USC with Mayava. 2 games where they played a quarterback capable of throwing the ball. Look what happens to the Notre Dame defensive numbers if you isolate it to just the 2 games where they saw a quarterback capable of throwing the ball. They allowed 29.5 points per game. Success rate is over 42%, 6.53 yards per play. Not looking all that elite. They really only played 2 games against a quarterback that's capable of throwing the ball. And by the way, I would take Curtis Rourke and the Indiana passing attack over both of these. Also, there's another thing to consider here, and I'm not even really sure how to take this. USC ran the ball all over Notre Dame. Over 70% success rate per rush, over 7 yards per carry, 197 yards on the ground. I'm not saying Indiana's going to run the ball on Notre Dame, but this Notre Dame run defense is looking a little vulnerable as well. On the season, they're allowing 3.86 yards per carry, 43.7% success rate per rush. These aren't bad numbers at all, but they're certainly not elite numbers. They're not as good as Indiana's numbers. Now, to be fair, do I think Indiana's going to be able to run the ball in this game? Probably not. I mean, we saw the Indiana rushing attack also dip, as well as the passing attack in these last 5 games. 3.55 yards per carry, 45.9% success rate per rush is still pretty good. So, I mean, no, let's be real. I don't think Indiana's going to run the ball in Notre Dame. I'm just pointing out USC ran all over them, so there is a possibility that Indiana's able to run the ball a little bit. And like I said, this Notre Dame defense has definitely looked vulnerable the 2 times they saw a quarterback capable of throwing it. So I don't hate the matchup for Curtis Rourke and this Indiana offense. I think they are able to move the ball. Here's the problem. I cannot unsee this. I can't unsee this game. The one time Indiana had the shot to prove it to us on the road at Columbus, week 13, they looked so bad. They opened up the game, drove right down the field, made it 7-0. Everyone was like, oh shit, Indiana is for real. From that moment on, the offense did absolutely nothing. They finished the game with 2.64 yards per play, 35% success rate. Now, it's only one data point, and we shouldn't throw the book out on Indiana from one game, but I'm being honest, it's kind of hard to unsee that. We all watched it. It was the game of the week, and it was an ugly showing offensively. This puts us in a pretty tough spot when it comes to making a prediction. On one hand, you got Notre Dame's defense. They've barely played any quarterbacks. The 2 times they've seen legitimate quarterbacks, the defense didn't look all that good. So Notre Dame's defense might be vulnerable on one hand. On the other hand, we got the Indiana offense where when they had the opportunity to show us they can move the ball and score points on the top defenses in the country, they laid the biggest egg of all time. So it puts us in a tough spot when it comes to making a prediction. If you're asking my personal opinion, I do think Curtis Rourke bounces back. I think Indiana is able to move the ball a little bit in this game. They're not going to hang 45 points, but I do think they are able to move the chains here and there. So I don't hate the matchup for Indiana offensively. But what about the matchup on the other side? We got the Notre Dame offense here. This is an offense that wants to run the ball first. They're 41st in rushing frequency. That is great news for Indiana because this run defense is for real. They're 2nd in the country in yards per carry allowed, 1st in success rate per rush, 6th in effective rush. And this shouldn't be that crazy, by the way. You remember Signetti's James Madison team, that was probably the best run defense we've ever seen from a group of 5 program. That was practical joke video game numbers against the run last year. He brought some of those pieces over with him to Indiana. This run defense is most definitely for real. We can poke holes in a lot of aspects of this Indiana team. Not the front 7, not against the run. They're that good. Look at the matchup on the line of scrimmage. Notre Dame's offensive line, 13th in line yards, 16th in stuff rate. Indiana, 1st and 1st. Nobody's been able to generate push against this Indiana defensive line, and that includes Ohio State. Ohio State averaged 3.97 yards per carry in that game. They weren't running the ball all over Indiana like that. And if you look at their last 5 games without the Ohio State game in there, they're allowing 1.55 yards per carry. 1.55. Under 47 rushing yards per game. Like I said, we can poke holes in a lot of aspects of this Indiana team. The run defense, I will co-sign. Now, does that mean Indiana is able to shut down the Notre Dame rushing attack? That's not what I'm saying. I mean, this unit has looked almost unstoppable. I'm just saying, if you look at their full season numbers, 6.4 yards per carry, over 225 rushing yards per game, almost 48% success rate per rush. They're not going to be able to do these types of numbers against Indiana. 3.42 average offensive line yards per game. That's not going to happen against Indiana, which means we have to take a good look at the matchup for Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard is most definitely going to need to make throws to win this game. They're not going to hand the ball off and cover 7.5 points solely on the ground, not against this Indiana defensive front. So will Riley Leonard be able to throw the ball on Indiana? Well, his numbers on the season are a little bit underwhelming. 7.1 yards per attempt, 16 touchdowns, 5 interceptions. But the story of the Notre Dame passing attack, I mean, they started off the season, 4 of their first 5 games were against top 50 defenses in terms of effective pass. Texas A&M, NIU, Miami of Ohio, Louisville, all very good pass defenses, and Riley Leonard and the Notre Dame passing attack looked terrible through 5 games. 6.24 yards per attempt, 171.6 passing yards per game. This passing attack was looking non-existent. But in the 7 games since then, we've seen their competition drop a little bit. Not that they played a cupcake schedule or anything, but they saw teams like Stanford, Georgia Tech, Navy, definitely secondaries that are easier to throw on than, say, Louisville. So the competition dropped a little bit, and we saw Notre Dame's passing numbers increase dramatically. In fact, Riley Leonard's been able to make some throws as of late. In their last 7 games, over 214 passing yards per game, 48% success rate per dropback, over 8.2 yards per attempt. Those are solid numbers. So the idea that Notre Dame can't throw the ball, that's not really accurate. First impressions are huge, especially in sports. So everyone watched the beginning of the season. Riley Leonard was struggling to throw the ball. Everyone came to the consensus, Notre Dame can't throw the ball this year. No one's really paying attention that they actually have been throwing the ball the second half of the year. So the idea that Notre Dame doesn't have a passing attack, that's not really based in fact. But here's the question. Having a passing attack and being able to throw the ball in Indiana, that's 2 separate things. I mean, Indiana hasn't really been thrown on. Washington and Ohio State were able to throw the ball in Indiana a little bit. In those 2 games, they allowed 201.5 passing yards per game. That's not even that bad. I mean, 46.2% success rate per dropback, 7.6 yards per pass to them. Those numbers really aren't that bad. In their other 10 games, they were absolutely dominant against the pass. 5.23 yards per pass to them, 34.5% success rate per dropback. So I do think Riley Leonard is capable of throwing the ball. I'm not a Riley Leonard hater or anything, but Will Rogers and Will Howard are both guys that I would consider better throwers of the football than Riley Leonard. And those were the only 2 guys that were really able to do anything through the air against Indiana. Not to mention, Indiana runs nothing but zone coverage. They're second in the country in zone coverage frequency. I mean, Notre Dame, 118th in the country in yards per route run against zone coverage. So I don't like that at all. Not to mention, we've seen Riley Leonard's production take a huge dip when he's under pressure and F yards per attempt when pressured. Indiana's second in the country in pressure rate, 6th in pass rush grade. So I think Indiana's going to be able to generate some pressure. Now, Notre Dame's got a great offensive line, but I do think Indiana's able to generate some pressure on Riley Leonard, adding even more fuel to the fire here for Notre Dame in their attempt to pass the ball. So do I think Riley Leonard's able to consistently make throws against this Indiana defense? I think my answer to that has to be no, which means there's no way I can lay 7 points. I mean, Notre Dame's going to be able to run the ball a little bit in this game. Indiana's got one of the best run defenses in the country, but it's Notre Dame. They're averaging 6.4 yards per carry for a reason. They figure out a way to run the ball. That kid Love is a monster. So they're going to be able to run the ball a little bit. Indiana's going to struggle to move the ball, but there's just not enough here to justify laying a full touchdown, in my opinion. I mean, it's just that one data point from Indiana. If you take out that Ohio State game, what would the line be here? 4.5? I mean, that one data point seems to be skewing the market so heavily in one direction. So I'm going to play against it. Give me Indiana plus 7.5, and yeah, I'm going to do it. Give me Hoosiers money line. A sprinkle. I'm going to take Indiana plus 7.5, and I'm taking Indiana money line. Show me the money, Signetti. I'm doing it. Live show, 4 p.m. Eastern time. We'll go through these 3 games. We'll go through the NBA slate, maybe some college basketball. I'm not sure what the schedule looks like. If you're able to make it, we'd love to see you in the comments. If you need me for anything, hit me up in the Discord. All of that. Please remember to bet responsibly. Later.